The morning began quietly, the kind of morning that feels heavy even before anything goes wrong. The elderly woman woke up before sunrise, as she always did. Her small apartment was neat but old, filled with memories instead of luxury. She moved slowly, careful with each step, as if her body reminded her every day that time had passed. Still, her eyes were sharp and her mind was clear. She sat on the edge of her bed for a moment, holding a worn handbag in her lap. Inside it were papers she had checked many times the night before. Bank statements, an old identification card, receipts folded and refolded until the edges were soft. These papers mattered more than anything else she owned. They represented years of work, years of saving, and years of sacrifice. She had worked most of her life. Long hours, hard days, jobs that paid little but demanded everything. She cleaned offices after dark, cooked food for other people's families, and cared for children who were not her own. She never complained. She believed that if she stayed honest and patient, life would eventually show her some kindness. Now, at her age, she needed to withdraw money from the bank. Not for anything fancy. The roof in her apartment had started leaking, and the landlord said repairs would not be cheap. She did not want to ask anyone for help. Pride was something she still held close. Even when her hands shook Dodd, the elderly woman waited quietly, her hands folded over her worn handbag. Each moment felt heavier than the last. The clerk had returned but did not immediately speak to her. Instead, he whispered something to another staff member, glancing at her with a mix of suspicion and impatience. She, the elderly woman, felt a small sense of relief as the clerk finally began to process her documents correctly. The presence of the man who had intervened seemed to hold the staff accountable, ensuring that every step was carried out with care and fairness. Her heart still beat quickly, the tension of the morning leaving a lingering trace. But she focused on staying calm and composed. The clerk examined her papers one last time, verifying each detail carefully. The elderly woman answered any questions clearly, her voice steady and polite. She could sense that the staff were now approaching the process with a level of respect that had been missing earlier. The manager, who had been observing from a short distance, stepped forward to confirm everything herself. Ensuring that the elderly woman would finally be treated properly, the elderly woman stepped out of the bank, her handbag secure and her documents carefully tucked inside. The sunlight felt warm on her face, a gentle contrast to the tension and discomfort she had endured inside. She walked slowly, taking her time, allowing herself to absorb the relief of having navigated a situation that had tested her patience and dignity. Each step reminded her of the strength she carried, a quiet resilience that had grown over decades of life experiences. She thought about the morning, how it had started with ordinary intentions and ordinary plans, yet had become a moment of challenge and judgment. The public scrutiny, the whispered comments, and the harsh questions from the staff had all been heavy, but she had endured them with calm and composure. Now, outside the bank, she felt the weight lifting, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. The man who had intervened followed at a respectful distance, ensuring she was safely out of the bank before he left her to continue on her way. She glanced briefly in his direction and offered a small, genuine smile, a silent thank you for his support. He nodded once, acknowledging her gratitude without words, and then stepped back into the flow of the city, disappearing into the crowd. She felt a mix of surprise and appreciation, realizing that kindness and courage could appear unexpectedly, even in ordinary places. As she walked down the street, the sounds of the city surrounded her. Cars hummed along the roads, people moved quickly along the sidewalks, and the faint chatter of daily life filled the air. She noticed the simple beauty of the morning, the crispness of the air, the sunlight reflecting off windows, the small details of a city alive with activity. It was a contrast to the tension of the bank, yet a reminder that life continued, full of ordinary moments that could carry extraordinary meaning. She reflected on the staff she had encountered inside the bank. Their initial suspicion and doubt had been difficult to endure, yet the intervention had shifted the balance. The manager and clerk had handled the final verification respectfully, and the lesson had been clear. Every customer deserved dignity and fair treatment. She realized that her experience, while personally challenging, had also left a subtle mark on those around her. A reminder of the importance of empathy and humanity in everyday interactions. The elderly woman thought about her own life, the years of hard work and careful saving that had brought her to this moment. Each document she carried represented not just money, but a life lived with determination and resilience. She had faced obstacles before, from long days of work to personal losses, and each experience had strengthened her patience and grace. The morning's events were another testament to her enduring spirit. She walked past a small park and noticed children playing, their laughter light and carefree. She paused briefly to watch them, a smile forming on her face. Their joy reminded her of the importance of kindness and fairness, the way simple acts could influence others in profound ways. She thought about the man who had intervened, his calm presence having transformed a moment of humiliation into one of dignity and respect. The lesson was clear. Sometimes, standing up for what is right could change someone's day, even their life. The elderly woman continued walking, her steps measured and confident. She passed by shops, cafes, and the familiar faces of people going about their daily routines. Each interaction, each small observation, reinforced the sense that life moved forward, and that moments of injustice or discomfort could be met with courage, patience, and empathy. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet assurance that she could face challenges with grace. No matter the setting, she reached a bench near the park and sat down, allowing herself a moment to rest and reflect. The morning's tension lingered slightly, but it was accompanied by a deep sense of satisfaction. She had navigated an uncomfortable and unfair situation with composure, had been supported by an unexpected ally, and had emerged with her dignity intact. It was a reminder that strength often came in quiet, measured ways, and that patience and kindness were powerful tools in facing life's challenges. As she sat, she noticed people walking by, some with hurried steps, others pausing to enjoy the day. She thought about the lessons she had experienced, the importance of standing firm in the face of doubt, the value of quiet support from others, and the impact of treating every person with respect. These reflections brought a sense of peace, a reminder that even ordinary days could carry extraordinary significance. The elderly woman pulled out her documents briefly, reviewing them to ensure everything was in order. Each paper was a testament to her careful planning, her perseverance, and her independence. She felt a quiet pride, knowing that she had maintained control over her situation despite the challenges she had faced. The morning had tested her patience, but she had emerged stronger and more assured. She watched as a few people passed by, noting subtle changes in their demeanor. Some had likely observed the events at the bank, perhaps reflecting on what they had seen. She understood that her actions, her composure, and the intervention that had supported her would leave a subtle impression, reminding others of the importance of fairness, empathy, and human dignity. The elderly woman rose from the bench, ready to continue her day. The sun was higher now, casting a warm glow over the city streets. She felt a sense of connection to the world around her, a quiet assurance that even small acts of courage and kindness could ripple outward, affecting others in meaningful ways. She walked with confidence, her steps steady, her posture upright, and her spirit unbroken. As she moved further from the bank, she reflected on the impact of the morning's events. She had faced suspicion and judgment, yet she had maintained dignity and composure. She had received support from an unexpected source, which reminded her that courage and empathy often appear when least expected. The lesson was profound. Life would test her, but strength, patience, and kindness could guide her through. The elderly woman continued her walk, taking in the sights and sounds of the city. She passed by familiar streets, shops, and people, each moment reinforcing her sense of resilience and independence. She felt empowered by her ability to navigate a difficult situation, to maintain dignity in the face of unfairness, and to experience human kindness in unexpected ways. She reached her destination, a small, cozy cafe she liked to visit. She entered quietly, greeting the staff with a polite nod. The familiarity of the space, the smell of coffee, and the gentle background music provided a comforting contrast to the morning's tension. She settled at a table, placing her handbag carefully beside her, and allowed herself to enjoy a moment of calm reflection as she sipped her coffee. She thought about the broader implications of the morning. She realized that the experience had not only been about her personal challenge, but also about the subtle lessons for everyone involved. Staff, customers, and even bystanders had been reminded of the importance of empathy, respect, and fairness. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her experience could inspire thoughtfulness in others, even in small ways. The elderly woman finished her coffee and prepared to leave, feeling renewed and empowered. She had navigated a challenging situation, maintained her dignity, and experienced the quiet support of human kindness. The morning had tested her patience and resilience, but she had emerged stronger and more assured. Stepping back onto the street, she felt the warmth of the sun and the gentle breeze, a reminder that life continued beyond moments of challenge. She walked with confidence, her steps steady, her posture upright, and her spirit unbroken. The events of the morning would remain with her, not as a source of pain, but as a testament to her strength, patience, and the enduring power of dignity and human kindness. Each document told a story of years of careful saving, of hard work and sacrifice. The elderly woman watched the verification process with quiet patience, feeling a sense of pride in what she had achieved. These papers represented more than just money. They were proof of her life's effort, her independence, and her dignity. Despite the earlier humiliation, she remained composed, determined not to let anyone see her falter. The man who had intervened stayed close, offering a silent presence of support. He did not speak to her directly, but his calm and steady demeanor provided reassurance. She was beginning to feel that, at last, justice was being served. The tension that had weighed heavily on her all morning was slowly lifting. The clerk returned the verified documents to her, his tone now neutral and professional. He explained that everything was in order and that she could complete her transaction. The elderly woman nodded politely, her hands steady as she collected the papers and the money she had come to withdraw. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. Around them, the atmosphere in the bank had shifted. Customers who had been quiet observers now watched with a mix of respect and reflection. Some had whispered or judged earlier, but now they could see the importance of fairness and dignity. The subtle lesson of empathy and human decency was settling over the room without anyone needing to speak directly about it. The elderly woman felt a deep sense of gratitude for the man who had stepped in. She did not know his name, and she did not need to. His actions had made the difference between a humiliating experience and a dignified resolution. She allowed herself a small, private smile, the kind that comes from recognizing that human kindness can appear in unexpected places. The clerk, having completed his part of the process, stepped back. There was a noticeable change in his demeanor. He no longer looked impatient or doubtful. Instead, he seemed to have learned a subtle but important lesson about respect and the treatment of customers. The manager nodded slightly, acknowledging that the transaction had been handled correctly. and that the elderly woman's rights had been respected. The elderly woman carefully organized her documents and funds in her handbag. Each item was placed deliberately, a reflection of her careful nature and the importance she placed on her belongings. She felt a quiet sense of triumph, knowing that she had navigated a difficult situation with patience, grace, and dignity. The man who had intervened finally spoke softly, just enough for her to hear. He commended her for remaining composed and for handling the situation with such strength. She thanked him quietly, feeling a profound sense of relief and appreciation. The silent observer had become an ally, a protector of fairness in a situation where it was desperately needed. As she prepared to leave the counter, she took one last look at the staff who had doubted her. There was no anger in her gaze, only a quiet acknowledgement that the situation had been resolved. She had faced public humiliation, yet she had maintained her dignity and proved that patience and composure could prevail, even in the most uncomfortable circumstances. The customers in line watched her with a new perspective. Some had witnessed her struggle, the unfair questioning, and the eventual resolution. Others had seen the quiet strength she had displayed throughout the ordeal. Her calm resilience had left an impression, a reminder that respect and empathy are essential in everyday interactions. The manager approached briefly, offering a polite acknowledgement and apology for the earlier mishandling of the situation. The elderly woman accepted the gesture with grace, understanding that mistakes could happen, but that what mattered was the way they were corrected. She felt a sense of closure, knowing that the dignity she had fought to preserve was intact. The man who had intervened nodded once more, then stepped back, allowing her to move freely. His role had been crucial, but now it was time for the elderly woman to leave on her own terms. She felt a quiet sense of empowerment, having navigated a difficult situation with the support of an unexpected ally, and her own inner strength. As she walked toward the exit, she felt the morning's tension begin to fade. The weight of judgment, suspicion, and doubt that had pressed on her chest was lifting. She carried her funds, her documents, and her dignity intact, a testament to the resilience she had cultivated over a lifetime. The bank resumed its normal rhythm, the subtle lesson of the morning lingering in the air. Staff members were more aware of their actions, customers more reflective of their assumptions, and the elderly woman had left a quiet but powerful mark on everyone who had witnessed her experience. Outside the bank, the sunlight felt warm against her face. She took a deep breath, appreciating the simple comfort of the day. She had faced a challenging and humiliating situation, yet she had emerged with her dignity preserved. The presence of the silent observer, the careful verification of her documents, and her own patience had transformed what could have been a moment of shame into one of quiet triumph. She walked slowly down the street, each step deliberate and confident. The handbag, now containing her verified documents and withdrawn funds, rested securely in her hands. She felt a sense of independence and control, knowing that she had navigated the morning with grace and resilience. The man who had intervened remained, a quiet figure behind her, watching only briefly before blending back into the flow of the city. He had ensured fairness, had protected dignity, and had reminded everyone present of the importance of respect. His actions were unassuming yet impactful, a quiet force for justice in a moment where it was desperately needed. The elderly woman continued her walk, reflecting on the lessons of the morning. She had faced judgment, doubt, and impatience, yet she had remained composed. She had witnessed kindness from an unexpected source, learned the value of silent support, and reaffirmed her own strength. The experience, though challenging, had reinforced the importance of patience, dignity, and resilience in everyday life. As she disappeared into the city streets, she carried with her not just the funds she had come to withdraw, but also the quiet assurance that she could face adversity with calm, grace, and inner strength. The morning, which had begun with tension and humiliation, had ended with dignity, fairness, and a subtle but powerful reminder of the humanity that can emerge even in ordinary places. Dot did not move, though inside her heart raced. She had faced challenges in life, but this felt cruelly personal. A young woman in line behind her whispered something to her friend. The elderly woman could not hear clearly, but she caught enough to know it was not kind. People began glancing at her, some with curiosity, others with subtle judgment. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to meet theirs. She reminded herself that her purpose here was simple: to withdraw her money and leave. Nothing more, nothing less. The clerk finally looked at her, his expression sharp. The man who had been quietly observing the elderly woman finally moved slightly, though he did not speak yet. His eyes followed every movement, every gesture, every subtle sign of discomfort on her face. He saw the way her hands gripped. The man who had been silently observing decided it was time to act. He could no longer stand by while the elderly woman, who had done nothing wrong, continued to be treated with suspicion and impatience. He approached the counter with calm determination, careful not to startle anyone. His presence was quiet but firm, commanding a subtle attention that drew the eyes of both staff and customers. The elderly woman looked up briefly as he approached, surprised but too composed to show fear or confusion. Her hands remained folded over her handbag, steady and patient. She did not know who he was, only that someone was taking notice of the unfairness she had endured. That small acknowledgement, without a word, gave her a slight boost of courage. The clerk, who had been focused on doubting and questioning her, looked up and immediately registered the new presence. There was something about the man's calm authority that made him hesitate. The clerk's sharp tone faltered, and he glanced at a colleague for support. There was an unspoken understanding that the dynamic at the downer had shifted. The man addressed the clerk directly, his voice steady but firm. He asked questions about why the elderly woman had been treated with such doubt, why her documents, which were clearly legitimate, had not been accepted without hesitation. His tone was calm, yet it carried an unmistakable weight of expectation and accountability. Everyone in the bank could sense the shift. The elderly woman watched silently, too surprised to speak but grateful for the support she did not even ask for. She continued to hold her handbag, her posture still composed, and allowed the man to intervene. His presence created a buffer, a sense of safety in the tense room. The clerk stammered slightly, caught off guard by the directness of the man's questions. He muttered something under his breath, glanced at his colleagues, and seemed unsure of how to respond. The tension that had been solely on the elderly woman now shifted, shared between the staff and the new figure before them. The room, once quiet with subtle judgment, became more aware of the injustice that had unfolded. The man continued, calmly insisting that the elderly woman be treated with the respect she deserved. He pointed out that her documents were in order and that the questioning had become unnecessary and unfair. He emphasized that every customer deserved dignity, regardless of age, appearance, or background. His words were deliberate and precise, designed to make the staff reflect on their actions. The elderly woman felt a mix of relief and amazement. She had expected no one to intervene. She had thought she would have to endure the humiliation alone. But now, someone had recognized her struggle and was willing to stand up for her. She remained silent, her eyes observing, allowing the man to speak on her behalf. She felt a quiet reassurance settle over her. The staff members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. They could sense that their behavior had been questioned publicly, and the presence of the man added an undeniable authority to the situation. The tension shifted from the elderly woman to the staff, making it clear that they needed to act differently. The man did not raise his voice. He did not demand apologies aggressively. Instead, His calm demeanor and unwavering insistence on fairness created a natural pressure that made the staff reconsider their approach. His presence and words were enough to realign the power in the room, shifting respect back toward the elderly woman. A few customers in line began to notice the intervention. Some exchanged glances, their previous judgment now replaced with curiosity or admiration. The atmosphere in the bank changed subtly but noticeably. People who had been passive observers now became aware that something significant was unfolding. The elderly woman, once the sole focus of scrutiny, now had silent allies in the room. The clerk finally spoke, his tone softer and less sharp. He began to process the documents more carefully, his previous impatience replaced with a degree of respect he had not shown before. The man observing continued to stand nearby, ensuring that the situation remained fair and that the elderly woman's dignity was restored. His presence reminded the staff that their actions were being witnessed and held accountable. The elderly woman remained composed, answering any remaining questions calmly and politely. Her patience and dignity, combined with the man's intervention, created a sense of balance. The once tense and uncomfortable environment now felt more neutral, even professional. The subtle shift in the room allowed her to complete her transaction with confidence. Knowing she was finally being treated appropriately, the man did not stop until he saw the clerk complete the verification of her documents without further unnecessary questioning. He ensured that the staff understood the importance of respect and fairness in their interactions with every customer. His intervention was not about confrontation, but about ensuring justice and human decency were upheld. The elderly woman finally allowed herself a small, quiet breath of relief. She had endured scrutiny and doubt, but the intervention had restored a sense of justice and dignity. She glanced briefly at the man who had stepped in. Though she did not know him, she felt gratitude and a silent acknowledgement of the support he had provided. The atmosphere in the bank continued to normalize. Customers resumed their activities, some quietly reflecting on the scene they had witnessed. The clerk, now more composed, completed the necessary procedures to allow the elderly woman to finish her transaction. The manager observed from a distance, aware that the situation had been handled appropriately and that the intervention had guided the resolution. The elderly woman completed the transaction with a sense of quiet pride. Each action was measured and deliberate, her composure intact. She collected her documents, her handbag, and the funds she had come to withdraw. The man observing remained nearby until she was ready to leave, ensuring that she was treated with dignity until the very end. As she turned to leave, the man offered a small nod of reassurance. No words were needed. The acknowledgement was enough to convey support, solidarity, and respect. The elderly woman stepped out of the counter area with her head held high, her composure maintained and her dignity restored. The staff, now fully aware of the importance of respect and patience, returned to their duties with a renewed understanding of fairness. The customers, who had been silent observers, carried with them a subtle lesson about empathy, dignity, and the impact of standing up for what is right. The man who had intervened remained a quiet figure in the background, content that the situation had been resolved without unnecessary conflict. He knew that his presence had made a difference, that a simple act of standing up for fairness had restored not only the elderly woman's dignity, but also reminded everyone present of the importance of respect in daily interactions. The elderly woman, now stepping back to the main floor, felt a sense of relief and quiet satisfaction. She had faced public doubt and judgment, yet she had emerged with her strength and dignity intact. The intervention had turned a moment of humiliation into a story of support, fairness, and human decency, leaving a subtle but lasting impression on everyone in the room. Her handbag, the slight tremble as she answered the clerk's questions, and the effort it took for her to maintain composure, He understood immediately that this was more than a misunderstanding. It was a moment of clear injustice. The elderly woman, unaware of his gaze, continued to answer patiently, each word measured and calm. She did not raise her voice, did not plead, and did not show anger. She knew that reacting impulsively would only worsen the situation. Instead, she focused on the documents before her eyes scanning each page carefully. She hoped that patience and truth would eventually prevail. Around them, the bank continued its quiet chaos. The soft hum of machines, the occasional beep of a card reader, and the murmur of conversations formed a background that contrasted sharply with the tension at the counter. Some customers shifted uncomfortably in line, aware of the growing discomfort in the air. A few sneaked glances at the elderly woman, but none offered help. They watched like spectators at a small, unwelcome drama. The clerk leaned closer, his expression a mix of doubt and impatience. He muttered questions, his tone sharper than necessary, and the elderly woman answered with calm precision. She showed every document, explained every date, and clarified every detail. She had nothing to hide. She only wanted what was rightfully hers, her money, her dignity, and a peaceful resolution. The man observing now shifted slightly closer. He did not approach the counter, but his presence was deliberate. His eyes conveyed a quiet determination. He could not ignore the way the elderly woman was being treated. It was not about rules or procedure anymore. It was about basic human respect. He knew that sometimes people needed an outside voice to stand up for them, especially when they were being unfairly challenged. The elderly woman finally paused, hands resting briefly on the counter as she took a slow breath. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained cautious. She had faced many trials in life. The public humiliation in a place she trusted was still a heavy burden. She felt the weight of judgment from the line behind her, yet she refused to let it break her spirit. The clerk, frustrated, turned to another staff member for guidance. They exchanged words in low tones, glancing occasionally at the elderly woman. She watched silently, sensing the whispers and the subtle gestures of impatience. Her heart beat steadily, though faster than usual. She reminded herself that truth and patience were on her side. The man observing saw the clerk's frustration, the subtle dismissal, and the growing discomfort in the elderly woman's posture. He realized that this could not continue much longer. Someone needed to speak up. He did not move yet, but he prepared himself mentally, thinking through the words he would use. He wanted to intervene, but he also wanted to do it respectfully, without escalating the situation unnecessarily. As the elderly woman returned to her documents, she noticed something, a shift in the energy of the room. It was subtle but noticeable. A few people in line began watching more closely. Their curiosity piqued. Some glanced at her with a hint of sympathy, though no one spoke. She did not know it yet, but this silent observer was ready to act if needed. She adjusted the papers in front of her, careful not to drop anything. Each page represented years of work and careful saving. She felt a quiet pride in what she had achieved, despite the unfair treatment she was receiving. Her calm demeanor masked the inner strength that had been built over decades of life experiences, struggles, and resilience. The clerk returned once more, his tone still sharp but tinged with uncertainty. He asked additional questions, and the elderly woman answered with patience and clarity. She knew that her composure was her strongest ally at this moment. She could feel the eyes of the line behind her, some impatient, some judgmental, some curious. But she remained focused, steady, and dignified. The man observing now took a small step closer. He did not interrupt, did not speak, but his presence became more noticeable. His eyes met hers briefly for a fraction of a second, conveying a silent message of support. She did not recognize him yet, but somehow she felt less alone. The unspoken acknowledgement gave her a small boost of courage. The clerk, frustrated and unsure, finally turned to his manager. They spoke quietly, occasionally glancing at the elderly woman. The tension at the counter had grown, and the manager's arrival seemed inevitable. The elderly woman waited patiently, her hands resting lightly on her handbag, her posture composed. She had learned long ago that patience often led to resolution. The man observing continued to watch, ready to intervene if necessary. He could see that the elderly woman was close to completing her task, yet the mistreatment had already caused a deep emotional toll. Her dignity had been challenged in front of strangers, and he knew that even a simple resolution would not erase the discomfort. She had endured that. As the manager approached the counter, the clerk handed over the documents. The elderly woman remained calm, ready to explain everything one final time. She spoke clearly and politely, outlining each document and its purpose. Her voice was steady, unwavering, and respectful. The manager listened attentively, nodding occasionally, and asked a few questions to clarify details. The man observing felt a sense of relief, knowing that the situation was moving toward resolution. He did not step forward yet, but he remained close, a silent presence ready to support if needed. He understood that sometimes just being there, ready to act, could make a significant difference. The elderly woman continued to answer all questions, her patience remarkable. She remained composed, despite the humiliation and doubt she had endured. Her calm strength was evident to anyone paying attention, a testament to the resilience she had built over a lifetime. Around them, the bank began to settle back into its routine. The line of customers watched quietly, some with newfound respect, others with lingering curiosity. The atmosphere was still tense but gradually easing. The elderly woman maintained her dignity, standing tall and steady, holding her handbag with care. The manager reviewed the documents carefully, asking a few more questions and verifying details. The elderly woman answered each one calmly, never losing her composure. The clerk, who had caused the tension, began to relax slightly, though he still carried a hint of uncertainty. The man observing remained alert, ready to speak up if needed. He saw the subtle changes in the room, the shift in the bank staff's attitude, and the growing respect from the line of customers. He knew that his role, if it became necessary, would be to ensure that fairness and respect were maintained. The elderly woman, unaware of his thoughts, continued with quiet determination. She focused on the task at hand, ensuring that every document was correctly presented and explained. Her patience, composure, and inner strength were evident to anyone who noticed, a quiet but powerful display of dignity. The manager, after careful review, seemed satisfied. The elderly woman had provided all necessary information, and her identity was verified. The clerk, still slightly embarrassed, nodded in acknowledgement. The tension at the counter began to lift, and the atmosphere in the bank returned to a more normal state. The man observing felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that the elderly woman's dignity had been upheld, at least for now. He did not step forward yet, but he remained close, a silent guardian, ensuring that the remainder of her experience would be fair and respectful. The elderly woman, still standing tall, took a deep breath. She had endured public humiliation, doubts, and impatience, but she had remained composed and dignified throughout. Her patience and quiet strength had guided her through the ordeal, and now she was closer to completing her task. The bank continued its regular activity, the hum of machines and murmurs of conversation forming the background once more. The elderly woman, holding her handbag tightly, felt a small sense of relief. The presence of the silent observer nearby provided an unspoken reassurance, a reminder that sometimes support comes quietly, without words. Questioned her again, this time raising his voice slightly. She answered politely, calmly explaining everything once more. She could feel a few stares from the line behind her, a mix of irritation and disbelief that she was taking so long. It was as if the bank itself was impatient with her. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. She had encountered disrespect before, in different forms, in different places. But here, in this bank where she had trusted to handle her savings, it felt like her dignity was being tested in public. Every doubt cast upon her felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. The clerk shook his head and called over another employee. They both examined her papers together, speaking in hushed tones. The elderly woman noticed the way they glanced at her, the subtle frowns, the whispers that were just loud enough for her to catch the tension. Her hands gripped her handbag tighter. She reminded herself that she had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. A man in the line beside her shifted uncomfortably. He noticed the way the clerk was treating her, the unfairness of it. The elderly woman did not know he was observing, nor did she know he had been quietly judging the behavior of the staff. She only knew that she was caught in a moment that felt humiliating and unjust. She tried to focus on her breathing, slow and deliberate, to keep the panic at bay. She remembered her late husband's words, how he had told her to stand tall even when the world seemed ready to knock her down. She lifted her chin slightly, forcing herself to breathe steadily, to show calm even when she felt her strength waning. The clerk returned to the counter, now holding more documents she had never handed over before. He demanded additional proof of her identity, papers she had not anticipated needing. She fumbled through her handbag, pulling out each document carefully. Each one had been checked, verified, folded neatly, but now it felt like nothing was enough. The whispers from the line behind her grew louder. She could hear a few quiet chuckles, and one man sighed audibly, shaking his head. She felt all eyes on her, judging, questioning, silently mocking. It was a humiliation she had never expected in a place she thought would be safe and professional. Her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the frustration of being doubted. She tried to keep her movements slow and deliberate, placing each paper on the counter carefully. She wanted to appear composed, even though inside, she felt her spirit being tested. The clerk examined each document meticulously, yet the suspicion in his eyes never left. He muttered under his breath, exchanged another glance with his colleague, and then asked yet another question. The elderly woman answered politely, once more, each word chosen carefully to avoid anger, but to assert her truth. The atmosphere in the bank had shifted. What had started as an ordinary morning now felt heavy and tense. People in line began shifting uneasily. A few glanced at their phones, pretending to be busy. Others whispered to friends nearby, sharing their own judgments. She felt the silent pressure pressing down, a weight she could not escape. She remembered moments from her past, moments when she had been treated unfairly, but had stood firm. She thought about her life, about the years of work, about the sacrifices she had made, and she realized that none of this had been in vain. She deserved respect, even if those around her did not yet see it. The clerk finally placed the last paper on the counter and leaned back slightly. He still did not apologize, still did not offer a word of kindness. The elderly woman felt a flash of anger, but she kept her expression calm. She knew that responding in anger would not help her. She needed patience, composure, and the hope that justice would come. Even in this small moment, the line continued to wait, the murmur of conversations and the soft hum of machines filling the room. She felt the eyes on her, the judgment, the impatience, yet she held her ground. Her dignity mattered more than anything else. She had faced life's hardships before and knew that standing firm was sometimes the only way to protect oneself. Then, a presence nearby shifted. A man who had been quietly observing the scene leaned slightly, his eyes tracking every detail. He noticed the unfairness, the humiliation, the quiet suffering of this woman who had done nothing wrong. He did not speak yet, but he made a mental note that someone needed to intervene. The elderly woman continued to answer the clerk's questions, her voice steady despite the tension. She explained her documents, clarified dates, and recounted her identity as clearly as she could. Each word was spoken with care, yet the clerk's expression remained doubtful. It was a moment that seemed endless, a test of patience and courage. She thought about the people she had helped in her life, the children she had cared for, the families she had supported through small acts of kindness. She remembered the lessons she had tried to teach them about patience, respect, and dignity. Now, she was living that lesson herself, forced to demonstrate strength even when it was difficult. Her hands ached from holding her handbag, her back from standing so long. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, willing her heart to slow. She reminded herself that this too would pass, that she was not defined by the judgment of strangers, but by the life she had led, the choices she had made, and the strength she still carried within her. Minutes felt like hours. The clerk finally stepped aside briefly, speaking with another staff member. The elderly woman waited, silently praying for the moment when her truth would be recognized. She did not know what would happen next, but she knew she had already faced more than she had expected that morning. She looked around quietly, noticing the faces of the other customers. Some were indifferent, some curious, some amused. None of them seemed to fully understand the weight of the moment for her, the depth of the humiliation and doubt she was enduring. Yet, she did not let it break her spirit. She held her head high, even when it felt heavy, and waited for the situation to be resolved. The bank continued its hum of activity, the ordinary sounds of business contrasting sharply with the extraordinary tension she felt. She remembered her husband's advice once more, the lessons of resilience and grace. She drew strength from those memories, standing tall, patient, and dignified, ready for whatever would come next. She dressed carefully. Her clothes were clean but old, a long coat that had seen many winters, shoes that were polished by habit, not because they were new. She looked at herself in the mirror and straightened her shoulders. She wanted to look respectful. She wanted to be treated with respect. The walk to the bus stop took longer than it used to. The air was cold, and the street was already busy. People rushed past her, eyes glued to phones, minds somewhere else. No one noticed her struggle to keep her balance when the wind pushed against her coat. No one offered help. She was used to that. When she reached the bank, the building stood tall and shiny, with glass doors and bright lights. It looked nothing like her apartment. Inside, everything smelled clean and expensive. She hesitated before entering, her hand resting on the door handle. For a moment, she wondered if she should come back another day. But she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The bank was crowded. People in neat clothes stood in lines, holding phones, checking watches. The sound of quiet conversations filled the air. The elderly woman walked slowly toward the line for the counter. She felt eyes on her. Though no one said anything out loud, she stood at the back of the line, gripping her handbag with both hands. Her feet began to ache, but she did not move. She watched the staff behind the counters. They smiled at some customers. They laughed softly with others. Everything seemed smooth and easy for everyone except her. As the minutes passed, her thoughts drifted. She remembered the first paycheck she ever earned. How proud she felt putting a few dollars into a savings envelope. She remembered telling herself that one day that money would protect her, that it would give her peace. When it was finally her turn, she stepped forward. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up at first. The woman spoke politely, her voice soft but clear. She explained why she was there and slid her documents across the counter. The clerk glanced at the papers, then at her face. Something changed. The friendly tone the clerk had used with the previous customer disappeared. The clerk frowned and asked a question, louder than necessary. Then another question followed, even sharper. The elderly woman felt heat rise to her face. She answered calmly. She had nothing to hide. She had done nothing wrong. Still, the clerk looked unconvinced. The clerk picked up the papers again, studying them as if searching for a mistake. People in line began to notice. The soft hum of the bank shifted. A few heads turned. Someone sighed loudly behind her. She heard a quiet laugh somewhere to her left. Her hands tightened around the edge of the counter. She explained again, slowly, carefully choosing her words. Her voice trembled just a little, not from fear, but from the effort of staying composed. She had faced worse in her life than a rude clerk. Still, this felt different. This felt personal. The clerk asked for additional proof. The elderly woman reached into her handbag, pulling out more papers. Each movement felt heavy, like she was being asked to prove her worth, not just her identity. As she searched, she noticed how quickly the line behind her grew restless. A man checked his watch again. A woman whispered something to her friend and shook her head. The elderly woman wanted to disappear, but she stayed where she was. She thought about turning around and leaving. She thought about the leaking roof. She thought about the night she spent listening to rain drip into a bucket. Leaving was not an option. The clerk stepped away from the counter without explanation, carrying her papers. The elderly woman was left standing there, alone, while the people behind her waited. No one spoke to her. No one defended her. She felt smaller with each passing second. Thought her mind wandered back to her late husband, who used to tell her to always stand tall. He believed the world would test her, but that she should never let it bend her spirit. She lifted her chin slightly, holding on to that memory. The clerk returned, speaking to another staff member in a low voice. They glanced at the elderly woman, then at each other. The clerk said something that made the other staff member raise an eyebrow. The elderly woman did not hear the words, but she felt their weight. She felt judged. She felt doubted. She felt like she did not belong in that clean, bright place. Her heart beat faster, but she kept her face calm. She reminded herself that she had every right to be there. This was her money. This was her life. Around her, the bank continued as usual. Machines beeped. Doors opened and closed. People laughed quietly. And yet for her, time seemed to slow down. She stood there, waiting, holding her handbag close, unaware that this ordinary morning was about to become something she would never forget. Something that would test her strength in ways she did not expect. The first part of her day had already taken more from her than she planned to give. And she did not yet know that someone nearby was watching, silently taking in every detail, preparing to step into a moment that would soon change everything.